what is postmodern art and what are postmodern movies? Postmodern is a very complex theory system of thinking about modern art creation and how it should be. And in this talk, we will look very precisely at a very important aspect of postmodern art. My name is Stefan Holstein. I studied movies, theater, German studies and art history. Now, that very central aspect of postmodern art that I'm going to talk about now is about how we see the world. And for that I brought an example object to see how we see it and how postmodern thinking would see it. And here is my example object. It's this. I ask you, what is this? And you will say, well, this is a fox, and this is not actually a fox, it's a stuffy, and you will have more information to say it's made of stuff, it's a thing that you put in your bed, and it's made to give you comfort, and so you will have a lot of knowledge about this thing and even have a name. So, postmodern thinking would not go about this object like that. Because in postmodern thinking, you would say, in the first place, you cannot actually define this object. This object is, it consists, in postmodern thinking, this object consists of two aspects. The first aspect is, if you see it, it has an effect on you. The first effect, if you see this, is that you go, oh, like it's cute, it has this effect on you that it is made for, like being a cuddly thing. So, that's one part of the effect that postmodern thinking looks at, is the direct effect of the object on you that can be used for art creation. The second aspect that postmodern thinking thinks about when it looks at this object is that you cannot really understand it. So what postmodern thinking now says about the object is, at the moment you are saying this is a fox and it's made for this and that, you recur on definitions, while the truth of the object is something that you don't see. So this theoretical theater maker Antonin Artaud that I talked about in the last video said, one of the big problems of our society is that we have a lot of predefinitions, and so in postmodern thinking it is believed that our thinking about any object directly slides past the truth of the object and goes to the definition of the object. So in postmodern theory building, this is not a fox. This is what it is. An object, and running along with that, it's physical, it has a spatial relation, it is somewhere in the room, it has, so the room, it is also there, and at the moment I am here, so it has a spatial relation to me. And so in postmodern thinking, the whole situation of this object being here in all its relation, in all its relations, and with its way of being justified just by the fact that it is part of the reality. It has a justification of being there. So the whole situation that you see at the moment is, in postmodern thinking, the truth. That is what postmodern thinking considers the truth. And describing this thing as a fox and having other information is not the truth. This is just words that distract you from seeing the real truth. The real truth is the object, its justification of being there in the cosmos, in the world as it is, its physicality, its position in the room, and its position towards me. That is the truth. And words are just distracting from that truth. So you see, if you think about truth like that, you cannot define it in words. You cannot define the truth in words if only what is happening, only what is there is the truth. Because postmodern thinking does this, because they say you cannot really grasp the truth. The truth is there, but you cannot really grasp it. So, that is a very important aspect of postmodern thinking. And now we will project that thought onto art creation, and that specifically in the theater. In the theater, we say you work with different mediums. You have, in the theater, you might have songs, or you might have people playing a role, what we call dramatic action. You might have lighting on the stage, and all these things that are different art forms that combine to make theater. Now, again, Antonin Artaud said, in a theater that uses words or even screams and light and darkness and space, I think that's how he said it, in a theater that uses all mediums that it can use, we create a theater that tries to express the manifestation of the human mind. What that means is, we ourselves think, in more modern thinking, think about us to be very complicated, to be complex beings, and to find a good language for our mind. We try to not think in these old words that we used before, but now we try to use the whole world as it is, as a more valid mean to express the human mind. So let's talk about the theatrical situation, and understand why Antonin Artaud said we break up language in order to see the truth about this world. I'm thinking about a theater situation in which you have a blue light lighting the stage. Artaud wanted in his theoretical writing that the light is not only put on the stage but also on the spectators, so that the spectators are all in this example in a blue light, because they have an experience from it. But what experience specifically they have? So let's have a look at how theater was thought before. As an example, I take the movie Notting Hill. That's a love movie where Hugh Grant meets Julia Roberts, and they fall in love and they become a couple at the end of the movie. It's a classical love movie. And in that movie, the color red is used every time Julia Roberts appears. She is the object of love that Hugh Grant wants to have for him. So she's the love object that he wants. And every time she appears in the movie, when Hugh Grant sees her, there's something red in the image. So, for example, in one scene, he says that she has to go, and he closes the door, and behind Julia Roberts there's a red car, and he closes the door and makes the red vanish from the screen. So this technique is used for making the movie so that you can feel it. So subconsciously you connect the red objects to the love thing that we long for, and that in this case it is one of the main things of the story that Hugh Grant wants to have. And so it hits us anytime the red vanishes, and it hits us psychologically every time the red stuff appears. That's the way colors can be used in a movie. But now we think about this differently because we have postmodern thinking. Now, in postmodern theater, people have all these aspects of words are not the truth, and the real truth is only that what you see. So postmodern theater does the following. It presents to you circumstances that you cannot put a meaning to. Like, people might come on the stage, and as I explained in the other video, people come on the stage and do things that you cannot, where you not say what they actually mean in terms of the story or the plot that is happening. 2,500 years ago, Aristotle wrote and talked about theater. And he said the most important aspect of theater is what he calls the mythos, that's Greek, and the word relates to myth. And what he means with that is the plot or the story. So he says the plot or the story is the most important aspect of theater. And all the other things, like the music and the dancing and what the actors do, it all serves to illustrate the plot. Now, that means if you have a scene that is set in the woods, if you have people in the woods and the story is in the wood, then you would put up some trees or indications of trees on the stage, or you would make an image of a wood in the background. And now, in more modern theater forms, people thought, well, maybe we could do this differently. And for example, in the 60s or 70s, in a German theater called the Schaubühne am Hellschen Ufer, that was the theater, they played a famous drama by Schiller. And in that drama it's called The Robbers, and it is mostly set in the woods. But instead of making wood images in the background or indications of trees, they projected pop art images in the background. So they had pop art images in the background, and in the foreground people playing a famous classic drama by Friedrich Schiller, German playwright. So you see, the background is doing something else as the foreground. So in postmodern thinking, the mediums that are used in the theater are not used anymore for illustrating the plot. They are used as their own reality. Now, as I said, we see the object in this kind of theories. We see the object as being a truth in itself that is that you cannot really put meaning to, in the sense of using words for it, because as soon as you do that, you slide past the actual meaning of the object, and the meaning of the object is in actually what it is. Theater and art has always been about finding more sophisticated stuff, like asking the real questions. What are we? What? How can we understand the world? Like, art always thinks about the world as having a higher meaning to it. That's important. Art is never created in thinking there's no higher meaning to this world. Art is always about finding this higher meaning. So the object not only has this "it is what it is" aspect, it also has a higher meaning. Things have a higher meaning that we want to understand. And now we try to understand that in not directly going for the description that we know, but letting things unfold their actual meaning. So, in the theater of the past, the plot or the story was the main thing. In theaters today, we think, let's not make the plot the main thing, but instead let's say everything can be a part of the theater. The background, the lighting, the sound. As if you would make theater in the classic way, you would say there's a thunderstorm happening in the plot. That means on the stage we dim the light, make the lights low, and from the sound we play a thunderstorm sound, and then like a rolling thunder or something, and then okay, there's a thunderstorm happening. You understand it in terms of story, but that is as if you understand the fox that I presented as this is a fox, this is this and that. You would slide past the actual meaning, which in the postmodern definition is in the things that are there. So in modern theater forms, you go like, you set the light just the way you want it. It does not has to do with the story. You use story. There could well be a thunderstorm in the story. It's not that story is completely dropped. Story is still there. But the other things become more valid. So instead of having a hierarchy of plot and all the other things following that hierarchy illustrating the plot, you level all mediums of the theater and put them as being of the same hierarchy. The background can well do just what you want it to do without having anything to do with the plot. The sound can well do what you want it to do. The actors can do what they want to do. It does not has to be necessarily part of the plot. That's why in more modern theater forms you find, for example, people saying something and then making odd noises like wah, la, or they might just turn, or they might walk on the stage without the necessity to do this in terms of the plot. And so you think, wow, this is not giving me a meaning. This is absolutely stupid. Why is this theater, as theater becomes so stupid? It's not giving me a meaning. And the point for that is exactly that the theater tries to be meaningless. The theater tries to be meaningless. People walk across the stage without this having anything to do with the story or the meaning in the classic sense. Because at that point, at some point you start to understand that you're not supposed to say what it means in the old terms of meaning. so that you start to understand the truth that the things are what they are. The actor walking across the stage without any meaning, as soon as you don't put a meaning to it, at some point you start to see it in the postmodern way, that it has a meaning, and that this meaning lies in what is actually happening. That is in that example, a person walking from left to right, changing its spatial relations. That is the meaning. So postmodern theater or art tries to use the whole system of what the world really is for building the theater. So it becomes a new language. The new language of theater now is the whole world, the whole truth of the world as it is, used for the language as a language for building the theater. So we speak in this case, we say the text of the theater. A text is written words. And now somebody says, in this case we have a text of the theater which is the background, the light, what the actor does, and even the dramatic action, what the story says. This all is called text. This what is happening, what we defined as the things that are actually happening, the truth about the object, as postmodern thinking puts it. This now is the text, the new language of the theater. So what happens to the blue light that I mentioned? Before, in classic theater, you would have thought, well, there's a blue light, it probably is illustrating something. In the movie Notting Hill, the red light or the red objects tell you that the love thing that Hugh Grant wants to love is present. In classic theater, the blue light might indicate that it is night, as the thunderstorm sounds indicate that it's a thunderstorm happening. And in this case, you have learned, because you see so much meaningless stuff, you at some point start to not look for a meaning anymore. And at this point, you do not think of the blue light as what it means in terms of story. So you just go like, you wait for what the blue light gives to you. And in that moment, the blue light has a new quality. It is what it is. As I said before about the fox, the fox is, like, this is cute, and this has an effect on you. The blue light now has an effect on you. This effect unfolds because you are forced not to look for a meaning anymore. That's why modern theater is so meaningless, to force you to not look for a meaning, to give to make the things happening, to give them the possibility to have the effect on you that they actually are. So, from that point, all the mediums of the theater, like the sound and the words, the dramatic action, the background, the setting, like the spatial arrangement and the things and objects on the scene, all are formed not thinking about what they mean, but they are formed thinking about dropping the meaning, setting aside the meaning, and just forming them all together as a new language, trying to have an effect on the viewer. So in this case, the unity of the theatrical work is not because it illustrates one certain story. The unity is because everything happens on the stage. It's all put together. Art itself is the justification for that. It's an artwork, it's a theater piece. Even if it has no story. A lot of modern theater still has a story, but it does not need a story. You could just as well have the actors walk around, make strange noises, and speak words that don't meet and don't tell any story. As I said in the other video, where I talk more about how the painted artworks developed things or are thought in connection with postmodern theater or postmodern movies. You can find that if you look at my channel. So that's what theater does. In classic times, you would have said, I make Shakespeare, Romeo and Juliet, so I take a man and a woman, and I build the settings as Verona should look like in the Middle Ages, because the theatrical play starts as one of the first sentences is in fair Verona, where we lay our scenes. So that's what you would have made. You would have illustrated a story. In postmodern theater, the story is not the main point. There can be a story, but there doesn't have to be a story. You could make a theater without a story, just using and sense, and also sense as we generally think of it, is not necessary anymore in postmodern theater. You could just make a person walk across the stage without there being any sense. People can say senseless things like wah wah. And people can say words that don't make sense. And in this forms also the way you say stuff becomes more important. Because if I'm like expressing despair in a story, and I want to express this, I could say as you've seen in more modern forms, like in theater forms like Theodoros Tersopoulos from Greek, or Gruber, who worked for these in the 60s and 70s for the Schaubühne am Hellischen Ufer in Germany that I mentioned. They say stuff like and they use this quality of words that are just sounds expressing despair, where you would say that's a bit too much, it's meaningless, you cannot follow the story, because they got the freedom to not have a story, but use things as they are, and having like this effect that the fox had with the effect is awe, and this effect is it puts you in despair. So words leave the necessity to mean things, and have the effect can be used that they have on you, and objects leave the necessity to mean something, to mean that this is Verona in the Middle Ages, and you could put an object because of the effect. And as I said in the other video, the material must not be used as being the material that is that would be realistic in the background of the story. You could just put a material to have the effect that you have when somebody thinks of touching the material or feeling close to that material, like so you can use the materiality of the things on stage. You could use the images of the background, the objects on the stage, the way you speak, everything you can use without directly going for what it means. So you make theater that does not in the first place mean something, and therefore becomes true in the terms as we think reality in postmodern, in the postmodern thinking, the postmodernism. We say truth is how it actually is, and the truth cannot be defined. It cannot be defined with words. You cannot explain it, and especially not because there's a higher truth to all the things. You cannot explain it. You see it's physical, it's there, it's doing things, and it has meaning, even story meaning, but you cannot define it. Not try to define it. speak with it as it is. That's a major aspect of postmodern art. It's this thinking about that the world is not to be described and then using it as a language itself that is not dependent on what we called meaning before. As Antonin Artaud said, the problem with this world is that we have a grid, a framework of meaning that we put to everything instead of dropping this and then having the real meaning have an effect on us, understanding the things as they are, and understanding that this is the meaning of the thing, that this is more precisely defining the meaning of the things, that they are what they are at the moment. So modern theater is what it is at the moment, and that's what it wants to convey. That's the effect that it wants to have. And that's why it becomes meaningless, because something being meaningless in terms of story does not mean that it is not actually there. It does not mean it has no effect. Me saying wow, wow, wow is meaningless, but it has meaning in the new sense of, in the new definition in postmodernism, because it happens, it is there, and it has an effect. So it has the new form of meaning. That's how postmodern thinking defines meaning, and how why the word text is used for that meaning. The text can be everything: the background, the objects, what the people do, and what the people do must not be dramatic action. It can also be just doing something, throwing a ball, kicking balls across the stage, for example, or in Mears Cunningham, that's a performer from the middle of the 20th century. He had made a dance, and he had an artist to put spheres in the background. So these spheres, they don't mean anything. They were not realistic, but they were there in the postmodern thinking. They were just spheres on the stage that does something. That's the new language of the theater, so to say, that you grasp with not when as soon as you don't look for meaning in terms of words or story. Let's put that finally put that to the movies. What does it mean in terms of modern movie making? In modern movie making, we still use the plot and the story. In theater, some theater forms, the story can be dropped altogether. The meaning, a classic meaning, can be dropped altogether to achieve this new meaning, and the plot can be gone completely. But in modern movies or postmodern movies, we still usually use story and plot. But yet, this new way of thinking that the things are what they are and form a new language. Of course, this is absolutely present in thinking about movies. So, as an example, the movie Casino Royale, it's a James Bond movie. In that James Bond movie, James Bond chases a person that is probably a criminal or something. So James Bond, as a spy, wants to chase that person, and the person runs away. Now, what happens? The person runs onto a building site, and the first thing you notice is there's sand, and there's a sky, there's a setting, and a certain light situation, some mild light setting and colors, and all that now is not just accidentally where they just filmed that. Like in classic thinking, if you would see, let's say, a grass and a cow and blue sky, if you would see that in classic thinking, you would wait for the actor to appear and the story to start. You would say there's nothing happening. You would see the grass and the sky and the cow, and you would say there's nothing yet happening. But in modern, postmodern thinking, you say there is actually already something happening. The settings are already doing something. There's already theater. So that's the same with the James Bond scene. The setting, the sand, the building, the construction site, the light, the sky, the lighting situation, that all is already theater. There's already something happening. The guy is running. There's not very much story. The story is thin. A guy running away is very thin in terms of story. If you compare it to the what we think of Shakespeare as being very lot of artistically deep in terms of story, it's just a man running away. Yet this is theater. It does something. It has the physical action of somebody running. That does something to you. You have adrenaline, like, for example, and you seeing objects move in the spatial dimension, which is valid theater, moving objects, and you see the light and you see the setting that is like you feel as if you were in that setting. That there's a lot of theater happening in postmodern terms. Now the guy hides behind some tubes that they use on the construction site. He hides behind them, and yet then you see. Those are spatial objects of a certain form, and form of objects as an effect is as a validity in terms of actually being there in the universe. And the guy leans towards these things. They have a form, a certain form. They have a certain material. They are valid in speaking to you in terms of postmodern thinking. They are language, part of the language of what is happening. Just these tubes. He leans against the tube, so you have spatial relationship from the guy towards the objects in the scene. Next scene, he looks up at James Bond coming, and the construction things that they use, they have a certain rippled form, and in this case, you have object form that is on the image that speaks to you. It does not speak to you in the terms of making sense in words, but it makes sense in postmodern thinking of art. It is something, so it makes sense. It was used to convey an effect, to bring you an effect that cannot be described, but it can be used in this new thinking of theatrical language. So the rippled form, very strong form that is used. Then James Bond appears on the scene, and he jumped into a big car, a building site truck, transport car, and he chases this guy, and he crashes into a big fence of the building site. He crashes into that. This gives you physical action. It is an adrenaline rush. But also, and it's spectacular. It gives you an adrenaline rush, but also it is playing with the object, with the spatial stuff. An object is shattered. That is an effect in the way how things are really not to be defined. This is a very strong theatrical move to shatter a thing, make it shatter across the whole screen. So it's playing with the spatial stuff, with the physical stuff. It's a physical form of theatrical effect, something being shattered. Then the guy runs, and then the guy runs on, and James Bond crashes this truck into the tubes that we saw before, and those tubes get thrown in the air and move across. So heavy objects, quite heavy or big objects, moving through space. This is also theater in the new terms of the sense. There's a lot of stuff happening that you cannot describe with words or in terms of story, but there's a lot of physical stuff happening, objects moving, certain forms of objects, and the objects moving through the whole screen. The whole screen at this moment is filled with the big moving objects as the truck crashes into them. So there's a language, in this case of moving objects. Those moving objects actually become the language that is spoken at this point in this scene of the movie. So, and then the guy runs on the building. He jumps on the building that they are constructing, and finally James Bond crashes his big car into the building, again shattering a part of the building into pieces. Again, you have this physical, material theater of the shattering object, which now becomes valid theater in the way we now think about meaning as being in consisting of the things that are happening. So this example scene that illustrates how you think about modern theater. The lighting situation is not just realistic, it is what it is. You could well go to create a certain lighting situation just because you think it's the way you want it as a director. That's the way you want the light to be. You don't necessarily have to look too much for realism. Usually in Hollywood, modern or other modern cinema, still things are thought of as being somehow realistic. You don't just suddenly change the light from yellow to red and green. You could in postmodern thinking, but usually keep it realistic. But most important is that you understand the light as being language as soon as you don't define it. And that's why the way you create the frame is valid language. The forms that you have is valid language. Objects moving is valid language. People moving is valid language. All that becomes language, a modern theater language or movie language. So that's if you put this thinking onto movies, that there's a lot of things happening in the scene, and actually everything you can do can be used to create meaning, as now meaning is not thought as words, and meaning is not thought as what happens in the story. So meaningless things can be meaning, and that gives you a new way of thinking about what the set looks like, what objects are in the scene, where people move, where objects move, how the light is done, how the light changes. All that is put together to complex. The director or movie maker or art director puts this all together, or the group of people puts this all together to create an artwork that in postmodern thinking does not need to be absolutely unified. It does not need to be unified because it can do different things, like people playing Schiller's drama in front of pop art images. It does not have to be unified. In modern thinking, it does not even have to make sense. So it can like be not unified in the sense of explaining a story, because art itself, that it is an artwork itself, that it is presented at the same time, already justifies it as makes it a unity. It already is a unity because it's presented at the same time. Art itself makes it valid. That you put it together it's an artwork. It is unified, even if it's from its casual sense, from its casual sense that we used before. It does not even make sense. It's not connected. But in the modern thinking, it makes sense. It is there. It makes sense. So that's thinking about what actually makes sense, what actually is meaning, and creating this new form of text, and rethinking in movies, rethinking the everything that is there as doing something. And in more general postmodern thinking on postmodern art, rethinking the way of trying to put meaning to everything, and instead dropping meaning and having things be what they are, using them with the effects that they are and using them as just what they are, and so putting them together in a new way. That was this video. I hope you enjoyed it. Please subscribe to my channel. There are more videos about this topic, what is postmodern art. And if you like this video, I would really like it if you would press the like button and comment on the video, if you like. So, thank you for watching and have fun.